Steven Levenson is the screenwriter for Netflix's Tick, Tick, Boom. I'm David Buchanan with Gold Derby. Steven, great to be with you today. I wanted to ask you first about your background in this project, because you have extensive experience writing for both stage and screen. And this film feels like such a nice synthesis of both of your backgrounds writing for these different mediums. But I wanted to ask you, what was uniquely challenging about approaching Tick, Tick, Boom?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. I'm excited to be here. The really unique challenge about Tick, Tick, Boom is that it was a one-man show, is how it originated. Jonathan Larson performed this show during his lifetime. And he performed it a few times, and each time with a different script. And so when we began to think about how we were going to re-envision this story, we first had to ask, well, which story are we going to re-envision? And in going through the archives, we found about 5 versions of it. And it was really figuring out which of these scripts is going to be our basis for making this. And ultimately, we came up with an amalgam of all of them, obviously, that was sort of our source material. And then the other big challenge was turning a 45-minute solo show into a feature film, and how do you fill that in and make it feel full and rich, and how do you present this story in a way that is true to the way it began? We really wanted to be faithful to this idea of the solo show and the one-man show, and also give it that breadth and scope and depth that would make it feel cinematic. And so what we ultimately landed on was this structure where we're sort of seeing that solo show as the skeleton of our story. That's really at the heart of the film. And then around it, you're seeing the actual events that he's describing play out. And then within all of that, you sort of have this frame of seeing how those events became a show called Tick, Tick, Boom, which is the show you've been watching all along. So it was like kind of fun, like figuring out how to make all of those boxes fit together.
Yeah, you touched on my next question already, but I did want to know more about your process of working in the archive. I know you went to the Library of Congress and had access to all of Jonathan Larson's materials. What was it like just kind of sorting through and figuring out what would be good fodder for the film? And were there any temptations to maybe even expand the scope of the timeline you're working with? Because it is a really tight, week in the life of Jonathan Larson at a pivotal moment in his life.
I mean, that was a really incredible opportunity, was getting to go through those papers and getting to see all of the different versions of this script and sort of peeking ahead to the different versions of Rent, which we were not there to look at, but it was sort of like, how do you not look at those? And also looking at all of the different versions of Superbia, which is the show that Tick, Tick, Boom is about, the musical that he was writing before Tick, Tick, Boom. And so a lot of it was kind of, we only had a few hours there, so we just kind of copied as much as we could, and then came home with a huge stack of scripts and miscellaneous materials and started just pouring through them and looking for the connective tissue between the drafts. Like, what were the things that stayed from one draft to the next that felt like, oh, this is really at the heart of this piece, versus the things that kind of fell away or felt inessential. And also, since it's a musical, a big part of that was tracking the score and what were the songs from draft to draft, and were there songs that got lost along the way that might be worth reconsidering, like Swimming, which is a song that was in some drafts and not in others, and felt so cinematic to us and felt like it would be so perfect for this film. So it was a lot of doing that. It was a lot of reading. And yeah, our challenge, or what I thought was the fun part of this story, was trying to get as much of his story into this week. How much can we cram into this 1 week in every possible place, where can we see all of the dimensions of his life, from his working at the Moondance Diner to his relationship with his friends, to the thing that hovered over all of John's work, from Tick, Tick, Boom to Rent and beyond, which was the AIDS crisis. You know, how could we make sure that that was part of the texture of this, because it's so the texture of his life, as a writer, as a friend. But yeah, so the temptation that we had was to get as much of it as we could into this story. And that was true as well with the music, where we came back from the Library of Congress, and I remember being in a conference room with Lin, and we put up these note cards of all of the songs that we loved. And there were, 13 or 14 songs. And I said, I think we're going to be able to get 7 of these maybe, because it's a movie. And Lin was the one who was like, no, we'll get all of them. And I was like, okay, let's try. And so we managed to put songs like, he sings a verse of a song called Sugar in one scene. That's actually a real full song. And Green, Green Dress is a song from the musical that in this movie is a song that's playing on the radio for 15 seconds. And just to cram as much of that brilliant music as we could into this film was a really fun challenge.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that as well, because as I mentioned at the beginning, you have experience writing a libretto for the stage, Tony Award-winning book for Dear Evan Hansen. Congratulations on that, a few years belated. But so I wanted to know, what are the kind of different approaches or challenges to kind of crafting a plot for the stage and incorporating songs versus trying to, as you're saying, get songs into a film script for a movie musical?
It's a really good question. And of course, the big difference also is that in this film, our composer is no longer with us. So it's, you can't change the songs, which is both, a constraint in a lot of ways, of course, but it's also sort of freeing to have that constraint, because you have to solve problems the best way you can, versus telling the composer, write a new song. Like, you have to take what you have and make it work. I think the big difference between a stage musical and a screen musical is the visual world of it. And really, like, in a stage musical, a character can stand, or an actor can stand downstage and sing for 5 minutes, and it can be enthralling. You can't look away. And on screen, you really have to figure out a way to make it visually dynamic and interesting, because you just don't have that same raw, visceral power of somebody singing in the same room as you. So you have to keep it moving in some ways. You have to keep it interesting to look at, and you have to keep the story moving forward. And so the fun part of this film was cracking each of these numbers as a separate set piece. Like, each one of them had to earn its place in the film, not just sonically, which we knew all of these songs were amazing. And we knew story-wise that they made sense, but how can we cinematically make them all feel like they belong? And like that they all are part of the same film, but also stand out, so that a song like No More feels different than a song like 3090. Like, they sort of look different, they feel different. And so that was a really fun thing from the beginning, that we were really conscious of. You can't just write, interior, restaurant, and then put the lyrics to the song. Like, you have to figure out how that song is going to move through space and time. And I find that a really fun challenge.
Yeah, I spoke to both Lin and Myron Kirstein, the editor, co-editor, recently, and had just commented on how much I love how dynamic all of the musical numbers are, where, like you're saying, for 3090, we are in the New York Theater Workshop, we're in the apartment, we're in the diner, we're in the Strand. It's a really nice way of translating something that could be static into a visual medium.
Well, I think, something I really learned in being part of this film is the way that in a musical, in a movie musical, every element has to be musical. The costumes are musical, the cinematography is certainly musical, the editing is absolutely musical. Everything has to have a rhythm to it and a musicality. you can't just put a camera and film, like it has to somehow be speaking to the music. And Lin did such an incredible job of putting together a team of people and empowering that team of people to do really exciting, daring work from the beginning.
Yeah, I also wanted to ask you about inhabiting Jonathan Larson's voice, because the film is so intimate, which is another thing I love about it, is we really do kind of feel like we're getting a slice of life of Jonathan's, at this pivotal moment in time. What kind of resources did you have other than the archive and even his sister, Julie Larson, who's an EP on the film, to really kind of feel like you were able to inhabit and then write in Jonathan's voice?
Yeah, I mean, one really big help was we have a grainy VHS video of Boho Days, which I think you can find. I don't know if you can find the whole thing online, but it's certainly parts of it. And so just seeing John perform, you hear his voice so clearly, at least as an actor and certainly as a writer. And just what comes across very clearly is just the sheer energy radiating off of this person at all times. I mean, there is just so much, as Andrew Garfield has said, like he was always at an 11. And I think that that's true. There's just this ferocity about him. And then the other thing was we got to talk to so many friends of John's, and they all were thrilled to get to be a part of this and to get to share their stories. And there was a huge amount of commonality between the stories. And we learned things that I certainly didn't know before. And what came across really was this person, certainly who was amazingly driven and amazingly passionate, and also sort of furious that his work wasn't getting done the way he felt like it deserved to be. And somebody who was very impatient about that. But also this person who was this amazing friend, and had this amazing generosity and had this huge sense of extravagance and occasion, which is something we tried to imbue throughout the film, so that he would throw parties for his friends and they would be amazingly elaborate, even though he had no money to do it. And if you were going to go out for lunch, you would do a picnic in Central Park with, there would be napkins and fancy silverware, and like everything had to feel special. And that was such a good, sometimes as a writer, when you're writing about real people, you're looking for that like one little detail that will help you unlock a person. And for me, that was really it, that sense of extravagance, that sense of drama. I think he was a really dramatic person, as so many people in the theater are, in good ways and bad, so that was a fun element to throw in there.
Yeah, it does feel like just a really lovely extension of what we know of Jonathan Larson. Aside from just his masterwork of Rent, we really get to know him more as a composer, and a really nice peek into the other musicals that he wrote, including those lovely little pieces of Superbia.
Yeah.
Steven Levenson, congratulations so much on the film, and thanks so much for talking to Gold Derby today.
Thank you. This was great. Thanks.